Good evening and welcome. My name is Bill Browder. I'm head of the Magnitsky Global Justice Campaign. As many of you will know, Sergey Magnitsky was my lawyer in Russia. He uncovered a $230 million government corruption scheme. He exposed it, and in retaliation, he was arrested, tortured for 358 days in Russian police custody, and killed on November 16th, 2009, at the age of 37. That was 11 years ago today. Since his murder, we've been looking for ways on the anniversary of his death to honor him and to remember him. And 5 years ago, we came up with the idea of the Magnitsky Awards. The Magnitsky Awards are designed to recognize and honor other people in Russia and around the world who have lived in the same way as Sergey Magnitsky, taken risks and exposed crimes and challenged governments in extraordinary ways. In the past, on this evening, we would have had a wonderful event in Central Methodist Hall next to the Parliament, where everyone could gather together and feel the energy in the room of all of these brave activists, lawyers, politicians who have taken risks. Unfortunately, this year, because of the restrictions, we have to do this online. But next year, we'll be back at it in person to celebrate all of these wonderful and amazing people. I'm going to present the first award tonight, which is the award for an outstanding contribution to the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. And after that, my good friend, James O'Brien from LBC, is going to take over and present the other awardees. So let me begin by presenting the outstanding contribution to the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. This year's winners are Peter Omtzigt and Sjoerd Sjoerdsma, members of Parliament from the Netherlands. I want to explain to you the unbelievable contribution that these two gentlemen have made. After Sergey Magnitsky was murdered, one of the biggest objectives we had was to create consequences for his killers. And those consequences eventually evolved into something called the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act freezes assets and bans visas of human rights violators. We took this idea originally to America, and it became a law in 2012. It became a law in Canada in 2017. It became a law in the UK in 2018, in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kosovo. But the one place where we struggled throughout was the European Union. I went to the European Union, I went to Brussels probably 40 times, meeting with members of the European Parliament, meeting with members of the European Commission and the External Action Service. And I was constantly rebuffed at the European Commission, the External Action Service. And they said, you never are going to get a Magnitsky Act at the EU level. You might as well give it up. And they said the only way it's ever going to happen is if you go to each individual EU member state and ask them to do it. And so that's what I did. And one of the most important EU member states I went to was the Netherlands. And when I went to the Netherlands, I met these two members of Parliament, Peter Omtzigt and Sjoerd Sjoerdsma. I explained to them the virtue of the Magnitsky Act, and they thought it was a really solid and wonderful idea. And so they went to their government and said, we should do a Magnitsky Act in the Netherlands. And their government, who was enjoying all sorts of trade with Russia, said, we think that's a great idea, but we shouldn't do it here. We should do it at an EU level, knowing full well that they were going to punt it back to the EU where nothing would happen. But these two members of Parliament, Peter and Sjoerd, said, okay, to the government, if you're sincere, then we want you to actually go and do that yourself at the EU level. And the government, the prime minister said, no, we didn't actually quite mean it like that. What we meant is just a good idea. And so these two members of parliament said, well, we're not going to take that. And so they put together a parliamentary resolution calling on the prime minister and the Dutch government to formally introduce it at the EU level. And they went for a vote, and the prime minister's party and the far left and the far right voted against it. But everybody else voted for it. And in the Netherlands, you have a situation where there's such a coalition that they had enough votes to pass it. And so the government reluctantly went to the EU and put it into play. They didn't refer to it as a Magnitsky Act. They said it was their own idea, even though they'd been forced to do it. But once it was in play, it started catching fire. And then France joined, and Germany joined, Sweden joined, Denmark joined, Slovakia, the Czech Republic. And pretty soon, most countries were sort of on board with this thing, even though the Dutch government wasn't all that enthusiastic about it. And to just put light under their feet, these two members of parliament then did another resolution demanding that Sergey Magnitsky's name is on the law and that they push it expeditiously through the European Union. And that passed, again, with a majority. And as a result of their efforts, we now have a situation where we're probably 4 weeks away from an EU Magnitsky Act. The President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the External Action Service, Joseph Borrell, have all announced that we're within days of a Magnitsky Act. When the EU passes a Magnitsky Act, instead of having just 7 countries with Magnitsky Acts, you'll have 34 countries, 7 plus 27. And it's probably the most significant development in our whole campaign once the EU signs up. It's imminent, it's going to happen soon. I've actually seen the draft of the law. And it wouldn't have happened without these two gentlemen. Peter and Shord, thank you very much and congratulations.
Thank you very much for awarding me the Magnitsky Award. It's been a pleasure cooperating all these years. From the moment Sergey Magnitsky was killed, I've been very active trying first to put his death on the agenda of the Council of Europe, where my original motion led to a report which shed some light on the way he was killed. Obviously, most light was shed by the notes Magnitsky left himself. But his lasting legacy will not be that we know how he was killed in the end. His lasting legacy will be that there will be Magnitsky sanctions within the European Union. It's not easy to try to force your own government to start negotiating on a new law which applies for the whole of the European Union. But it's extremely important. It's extremely important that we will have a way of sanctioning people who are involved in major human rights abuses and hopefully also in major corruption, and be able to sanction them and their families, to prevent them from traveling, to freeze their assets, and to make sure that there is a punishment on them, so there is also a kind of prevention mechanism that other people do the same things. At this moment, we may need to apply that kind of sanctions to countries like Belarus. And it's thanks to Magnitsky and thanks to a lot of people who are in the event tonight that this has become possible. And this will be a lasting legacy for Europe as a whole, a Europe that is built on human rights and the values that go with it. Thank you very much.
I'm honored to receive this award, and I'm humbled to follow in the footsteps of the likes of late Senator John McCain and Boris Nemtsov. But most of all, I'm humbled to receive an award that's linked to the name Magnitsky, and I'm not sure that I can live up to the principles, the ideals that are behind that name. But we'll try. Who would have thought that what started with a parliamentary motion Peter and myself here in Dutch Parliament, would eventually force our government to take up the European Magnitsky Act, would lead to a grand European coalition of Greens, Liberals, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, all across Europe, North, South, East, West. Who would have thought that our call for a European Magnitsky Act on International Human Rights Day 2 years ago would be the final push to get Brussels into gear, to make them act. 2 years and we're this close to having an EU Magnitsky Act, to honoring Magnitsky, to honor his sacrifice, to finally be able to punish human rights violators worldwide by freezing their assets, by stopping them from getting into the European Union, whether they're generals hunting the Rohingya, whether they're rapists in the Central African Republic, or the killers of Saudi journalist Khashoggi. We finally have the instruments to take these people down. And as a former diplomat, I myself will finally have an answer to all those human rights victims that I've met in places like the Sudan, Afghanistan, and Palestine, where people ask me, where do I get justice for my raped daughter? Where do I get justice for my murdered father? Where do I get justice for my maimed brother? And I never had an answer. But I hope that pretty soon I will have the answer. You will get justice in Europe. You will get justice in Europe because we'll have an EU Magnitsky Act. We'll be at the front of defending human rights in the world again. And will lead in the battle against impunity. So thank you very much for this award. And I hope that soon we'll be able to celebrate not ourselves, not politicians, but the fact that we'll finally have this EU Magnitsky Act here in Europe. Thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome once again to the 4th annual Magnitsky Human Rights Awards, an event which is a testament really to the integrity of Sergey Magnitsky and the ultimate sacrifice that he made in defense of these values, but also, of course, to the indefatigability of the man you saw a moment ago, Bill Browder, whose vision for this cause and this event are, an inspiration to me, and I'm sure everybody watching tonight. The next award is for the Outstanding Human Rights Activist, and to present it, I'm delighted to introduce Agnes Callamard, who was appointed the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary or arbitrary killings in 2016. The current director of the Columbia Global Freedom of Expression at Columbia University is also a special advisor to the president of that university, and she directed the Global Freedom of Expression organization Article 19 for 9 years. An alumnus of Amnesty International and somebody who, like all of our guests and presenters this evening, has dedicated much of their professional life to championing and defending the sort of causes and the sort of values that are possibly in greater need of defense at this point in global history than at almost any other point in living memory. She also undertook the investigation into the extrajudicial execution of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. I am therefore delighted to introduce Agnes Callamard.
Dear Lujen, I so wish you could be here today to receive your prize alongside your wonderful sister, Lina, your biggest supporter, ambassador and advocate. Instead, you are detained in a Saudi high-security prison on hunger strike, likely unaware that we celebrate you this evening as we have celebrated you so many times over the last 2.5 years. Like many people present this evening, I have not met you. What we do know of you are these big brown eyes, your wonderful smile, your funny videos, humor, audacity, and courage. What we do know of you is the cruelty of those who have imprisoned you, threatened, tortured, sexually abused, just because you demanded to drive your car, just because you demanded an end to the guardianship system, just because you demanded gender equality. For all of that, you have been held incommunicado, subjected to solitary confinement, forced since 26th of October to be on hunger strike. In 2014, you had already been arrested for driving your car because you did not let a man drive you but claimed your own freedom of movement. For that, you were imprisoned for 73 days, a heavy punishment for a non-crime, but a smaller punishment compared to what happened 5 years later. This time around, it is not the nature of your action that brought you to jail. It is that you dared formulate demand on your own and with a handful of other Saudi feminists just like you, outside of any imposed framework, without any supreme leader directing your thought. For that, the Saudi regime is silencing you, seeking your surrender to male authority, trying to render you invisible to the rest of the world and to your own country, threatening and beating you into submission. Because the government of Saudi Arabia is afraid of your free spirit, your determination to claim your freedom of conscience, of the example you set for others in Saudi Arabia and around the world. I suspect, too, that it is because it cannot stand your smile, your laugh, your youth, your beauty, your determination, your courage. Because when you speak, Lou Jane, when you smile, when you act, when you claim, and when you advocate, the emperor feels naked. The prince is naked, naked. Gone the claims of modernity, disappeared the pretense of vision and authority. Against your smile, for driving your car, for advocating for equality, the most powerful man in the country feels insignificant, feels small, feels reduced. And ultimately, dear Lou Jane, he is indeed all of those things, spoiled of his cherished prize. Your detention has unveiled the treachery of the man and his regime, empty of any other values or vision than those that are driven by and for the self-interest, self-obsession of the autocrat. Dear Lou Jane, I do believe that you can and will overcome the cruelty of Mohammed bin Salman, that you and all that you stand for will outlive him, his cohorts of brutal counselors and guards, his silent and cowardly subject. But meanwhile, I think of you, of the softness of your smile, languishing in prison. Sometimes you may be scared, in pain, missing so deeply your mother, father, sister, brother, your home, the warmth and protection of their love. You may have found solidarity and sisterhood among the other detained in this high-security prison. But 2.5 years? How could they? How dare they? And I feel angry. It is not just the prince who is naked when you speak, claim, advocate, and smile, when you languish where you are. It is not just the prince, it is all of them too. All of those prepared to participate to the G20 meeting hosted by Riyadh in silence. All of those who signed sport cultural accord for events worth millions in silence. They did not say your name, darling Lou Jane. They did not think of you when they put their signature at the bottom of the page. Instead, They had dollar signs in front of their greedy eyes. They saw consumers, market shares, and profit. They did not see you in your prison cell. They did not recall your white smile. They did not say your name. And no matter what they may claim, they too are rendered naked. They go along with the charade, giving a tainted seal of legitimacy to an autocrat leader who jails you and others, not for what you have demanded, but because you have demanded it, because you have raised your voice and raised your arm in defiance and your car keys, because you looked up to the world and said, I do not need a non-elected leader to tell me how to think, when to smile, when to drive. Because you said, I exist. I exist. I, Lujen Al-Athawi, Saudi, female, age 31, feminist, a woman, an activist. I exist. Me, Lujen Al-Athawi, an outstanding woman human rights activist from Saudi Arabia. Dear Lujen, I am presenting you with the Outstanding Human Rights Activist Prize just a few days after democratic processes delivered hope again in the world's most powerful country, thanks to the strength, resilience, determination of human rights activism, particularly from young and Black women activists. They did that against bigotry, against cruelty, against hate. I imagine how much you would have celebrated this moment and loved and supported the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements. I have a sense of optimism that maybe, thanks to you, thanks to them, just maybe, it will be a little bit less difficult to fight for, argue and demand your freedom and that of many others around the world. That maybe that diminished naked prince and his supporters will be a little less brazen, a little less arrogant. That it will finally become easier to state the obvious, that no country should be allowed to buy its way out of accountability, no matter their influence, strategic relevance, no matter who their friends are. That those prepared to attend the G20 summit finally will speak up for you and many others. That there will be no more naked emperors, no more weavers of fabrication, no more fearful subjects waving false flags at the world's complicit camera. Dear Lujen, I find myself imagining the Global Magnitsky Prize 2020, and you are here in person presenting the prize to the 2021 recipient for the Outstanding Human Rights Activist.
My name is Alia Al-Hathloul, and I shouldn't be the one appearing here today. I'm the sister of Lujain Al-Hathloul, who has been awarded the Magnitsky Award 2020 for outstanding human rights activism. My sister Lujain fought for women's rights in our homeland, Saudi Arabia, including the right for women to drive and the end of the male guardianship system. And for that, Saudi Arabia arrested her, tortured her, and now she has been forced into a hunger strike. Saudi Arabia is becoming a police state. It's the most repressive it has ever been. People's voices have been muzzled. And now, only international pressure and recognition could save prisoners of conscience. It's been nearly 3 years that Lujain is in prison, but we remain hopeful of her release because the world has not forgotten her. and is still fighting for her. So thank you to the Magnitsky Committee for awarding her such a prestigious prize. Thank you for immortalizing her name and her fights. Thank you for being the voice of the voiceless.
Thank you, Lina. And it is rather hard to think of a better illustration of the importance of the work being done by all of the people being honoured tonight as we think of Lujain, as we speak on hunger strike in a Saudi jail. Perhaps also a timely moment to reflect upon how the Magnitsky Awards have moved beyond the purview merely of Russia, where Sergey came to his tragic death, but also now to encompass many other corners, potentially all corners of the globe where injustice and infringements of human rights are rife. We've already heard from Holland and now Saudi Arabia, Belarus, Malta, Hong Kong, and of course Russia will also be on the agenda this evening. But as the Magnitsky Awards themselves become part of almost the furniture of the international human rights movement, it is testament once again to everybody involved in the organisation that no country is off limits to the work of the people we will be hearing about this evening. Stephen Fry is a man who, if he had a business card, it would need to be about 1.5 miles long. An author, an actor, a screenwriter, playwright, journalist, poet, comedian, television presenter, broadcaster, podcaster, film director, and all-round good egg. I had the pleasure of interviewing him recently over a Zoom link to his study where he looked like a cross between the John le Carré spy George Smiley and J.K. Rowling's wizard Dumbledore. But it is perhaps his latest project, a retelling, a reimagining of some of the great myths of Greek history that qualify him to present an award this evening, because heroes and heroism very much form the bedrock of his attempt to tell these stories to a younger generation, most recently in his new book, Troy. And Stephen is here this evening, quite rightly, to present an award that encompasses many of his own areas of interest and speaks directly to the power that art can have in the pursuit of rights. The reason I think why fascists tend to hate art and artists, why books get burnt, and why often artists themselves can become targets for fascistic and totalitarian regimes is best encompassed in one word, and that word is empathy. Art teaches us empathy. It teaches us to imagine what life would be like in somebody else's shoes, in somebody else's situation. And once empathy is alive, once the flames of empathy have been ignited in our hearts, we have the ability to understand the wrongness, the fundamental injustices being visited upon people whose lives at first glance bear no resemblance whatsoever to our own. It is therefore with particular pleasure that I invite Stephen Fry to present this year's award for Courage Under Fire.
Hello, I'm Stephen Fry, and it gives me enormous pleasure to be announcing the winner of the Magnitsky Prize. It's a group for whom I feel an extraordinary affinity, a group of some of the bravest, most passionate and gifted people I've ever come across. They are the Belarus Free Theatre, founded by Nikolai and Natalia, and supported by many people within the tormented country of Belarus, which has been seeking its freedom from oppression and tyranny for a very long time. And Belarus Free Theatre has spearheaded that in the face of unbelievable danger and oppression and harassment. They have continued to send a clear message of hope. All they ask for is democracy and freedom. They seem like two very small things, and however much we may complain in the West about the threats to our own democracy and freedom, we know there's a huge gap between what we can do in our countries and what is available to the citizens of Belarus. There's been a great deal of publicity about what's going on in that sorry country lately. They've had an election, of course, and with a fake result, and there have been demonstrations in the street. But for much, much longer than that, Belarus Free Theatre has plied its furrow and done its work to keep the name of Belarus uppermost in people's thoughts and memories. I've been utterly inspired by them. I've done nothing like enough, but they have come to Britain, in fact, and been very welcomed here by most of us in the theatrical community, because we recognise that theatre is a marvellous bellwether, a beacon that can symbolise the entire hopes of a nation. And while they have spent a lot of their time being political, they've also carried on being a remarkable theatre group. And I think what the Magnitsky Awards stands for in terms of rising up and standing up against bullying and tyranny and despotism and the manipulation of the truth and the manipulation of populations, it couldn't be better exemplified than by this group. So I want to congratulate them from the bottom of my heart, to reiterate my deep, deep admiration for everything they do and continue to do, and to hope that their brave, brave commitment soon brings a result. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the award committee and our dear friend Bill Browder, who makes our voices much stronger. I'm honored to accept Magnitsky Award on behalf of Belarus Free Theatre, especially this year when we mark 15-year anniversary, and also we have a major dream to take dictator down this particular year. It's a victory of each and every member of the company who helped build it up for the last 15 years. They put their everything in the fight with Europe's last dictatorship through means of art. I really wish this acceptance speech could have been done not by me, but all members of the Belarus Free Theatre. Yet, while Europe is in lockdown, our actors, managers, students, among hundreds of thousands of Belarusians are protecting European democracy in the streets of Minsk every day. Even as I'm delivering this speech today, hundreds of Belarusians are getting arrested and beaten up on the streets of Belarusian cities and towns. Politicians and diplomats lead a difficult life, and they must say what other people want to hear from them. I, on the other hand, deal with human rights, and I have the luxury of being less polite. My job is not to be politically correct. My job is to make sure that those who killed our friends in 1999, 2000, 2009, 2010, those who killed my compatriots in 2020, tortured and raped them, all those people must stand up at trial and serve appropriate terms in jail. Today, together with my husband, Nikolai Halezin, and all members of Belarus Free Theatre, we dedicate the award to Anatoly Krasovsky, Dmitry Zavadsky, Yuri Zakharenko, Viktor Gonchar, Oleg Bibenin, Gennady Karpenko, the people who dedicated their lives to stopping the dictatorship in its root more than 20 years ago. Today, we dedicate the award to all people of Belarus who keep fighting for democracy. I wait for the day to come when the bodies of our friends will be found, and those who killed them will answer for their crimes. However, today, those accountable for their deaths are still in power and lead on the most brutal crackdown in contemporary history of Europe. Up to 20,000 people got arrested, at least 500 cases of torture and cases of rape are confirmed by UN. 5 people are murdered, and we have more than 100 political prisoners in jails in Belarus. Belarusian borders are currently closed to all foreigners, and Belarusians involved in campaigns forcing Lukashenko to step down. At the same time, international politics doesn't step outside of its comfort zone. All issues nothing more than condemnation of Lukashenko action. It is the European bureaucracy that keeps dictator in power. Don't tell us you support us, show us. People of Belarus are doing their part. They are defending their freedoms every day on the streets of towns and cities in Belarus. Our friends and managing directors of all Belarus Free Theatre operations in Belarus, Svetlana Sugaka and Nadia Brodskaya, together with Daria Andriyanova, who is to be released today after her second arrest, were among the first to be arrested on the 9th of August. Having spent nights and days in appalling conditions with no water, no toilet, been completely stripped down by riot police and kept with 36 women in tiny 3-meter on 4-meter cell, they will forever remember the screams on other side of the wall of raped and tortured inmates whose fate they could have shared at any moment. People of Belarus deserve to see names of those who tortured, raped and murdered their beloved ones on the list of sanctions. Human rights abusers must be named and shamed, and there is a major mechanism for that. That is called Magnitsky Act, and EU must adopt it. They must understand the consequences of individual responsibility. Hierarchy of military command is not an excuse of the human rights abuse. There is always an option to side with people who they swore in to protect. There is no chance for democracy to survive worldwide while politicians stay indifferent to rapes, tortures, and murders of Belarusians who represent the essence of direct democracy and non-violent resistance, who represent love against violence, who represent wisdom against political ignorance. We are strong as we are in unity. This year, all Belarusians, all over the world, no matter what is their professional backgrounds and where they live, became one. Dictatorship is contagious, but we are stronger than any dictator when we are together. They won't have enough cells to jail us all. They can arrest us, they can kill us, but others will take our places. Sir Tom Stoppard, our close friend and life patron, who came to meet us all in 2005 underground in Minsk, said, "Dictatorship is not a political issue, it's a moral one. Morality and unity are what puts dictators into the panic mode. In our country, our right to vote is ephemeral. Our voice is not counted. We simply do not exist as the regime says so." Belarus has entered into existential crisis. Its life and death choice. In given conditions, for all Belarusians, our choice here is limited. Fight for freedom. If we are able to bring dictator down by means of people's power and will in Belarus, it will be a major signal to our neighbors in Russia that dictators can and will be overtaken. It will be a chance for us to stabilize democracy in the European continent. In order to protect democracy, we must move out of our comfort zones. We must stand up to defend our rights. Democracy is not permanent and very fragile. If we do not act, the future of the world is under threat. Magnitsky Award is the celebration of justice, honor, and dignity, as it is dedicated to a man who was just a human being who made his choice to defend what is right, to Sergey Magnitsky. It's enough for all of us to be just human beings who are on the right side of history and justice. It's not enough to let the world be based on realpolitik. Morality and humanity must be brought back into the world of politics. Magnitsky Act is here to exactly that. There is a superior beauty and human resistance for hope. By making Belarus safe, there is a chance for Europe to save itself and bring peace to its borders and beyond. Today, for people of Belarus who are a role model of non-violent resistance for the world, to Belarus, that is to become the youngest democracy in Europe if we act together now. Живе Belarus!
Thank you for Magnitsky Award. It's a major support while we fight for freedom in Belarus.
When we got arrested and went through a horror in jails, our friends, families, colleagues and compatriots came instead of us to defend our voice and freedoms.
When our compatriots got killed, we came instead of them.
There are many of us. They could arrest us, but the others will come. They could keep arresting us, but they don't have enough cells.
We're a Belarus Free Theater. We're a one. The world. You must stand up with Belarus.
the Belarus Free Theatre, reminding us that while in comfortable, cosy UK, sometimes politically active actors and actresses and artists can be rather rudely described as lovies, but when push comes to shove, it is often the creators of culture that lead some of the most important battles of our age. Time now for the Magnitsky Award for the Outstanding Justice Campaign. And as I mentioned a moment ago, when I first became involved in the work of Bill Browder and the Magnitsky Awards in general, it did still feel as if it were a battle being fought on a very distant field, as if events in Vladimir Putin's Russia, while clearly relevant to those of us on this side of the world, were still far distant. But as the awards have evolved and as the stories that these awards tell have continued to be told, there's been a very strong sense, perhaps, of events moving ever closer to home. And it is now within Europe that the next award is to be awarded. And to make that award for the Outstanding Justice Campaign, I would like to introduce you to the journalist and CEO of Rappler.com, Maria Ressa. Rappler, as you probably know, is an 8-year-old company that is really leading the field in online news reporting in the Philippines. She has been honoured herself for her work around the world and her courageous and ever more urgent attempts to fight disinformation, fake news, and attempts to silence the free press. Maria was fighting some of these battles when some of us were still struggling to understand precisely what the phrase fake news was supposed to mean. She's been named Time magazine's Person of the Year and has won the prestigious Golden Pen of Freedom Award from the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers. In fact, if I were to list every honour that has been visited upon Maria, we'd be in danger of crashing into next year's awards, which hopefully will be taking place in rather less straitened circumstances. A former CNN bureau chief in Manila and then Jakarta, she's also the author of 2 books, Seeds of Terror, an eyewitness account of Al-Qaeda's newest centre of operations in Southeast Asia, and From Bin Laden to Facebook. She was also honoured last year with a Magnitsky Prize for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. I am therefore delighted to present this year's Outstanding Justice Campaign Award, Maria Ressa.
I have 3 adjectives that I think of when to describe Andrew, Matthew, and Paul Caruana Galizia. Intense, tragic, and hopeful. And, I'll tell you how I met 2 of them. Matthew, I've known for a while. We've been in different places together, and we inevitably always come together. And his intensity, is when you're talking to him one-on-one, you feel it. But beyond that, I was on a panel with him, and he filled the entire hall. It's the intensity of purpose, the intensity of passion, the intensity of youth. And all 3 brothers have this. It is also intensity that grows out of being in the kitchen with your mother one day and then, moments later, having to run out to see her die. It's tragic what has happened to this family. And it is a family of journalists. That's the other part. And it hasn't stopped them. And I think that's the other part I love. That despite the tragic events they have lived through, they continue to fight for justice. And that is exactly what we're seeing. And that is why they give all of us hope. Matthew came up to me and said at one point, what happened to my mom, I'm worried it will happen to you. And you know what? I get hope from watching their family deal with this. Because in the end, that's the only way evil forces will succeed, is if we lose our faith, lose our hope in justice. So we share the same lawyers. By the way, Keelan Gallagher, who has, I've learned a lot from also during this time. Let me read to you what the Magnitsky Awards Committee has written that they are awarding Andrew, Matthew, and Paul Caruana Galizia with the Magnitsky Prize for Outstanding Justice Campaign. Intense, tragic, hopeful. With you, we are with you in the search for justice.
Over the past 3 years since my mother's death, I've written and given so many awards acceptance speeches, and they were always so easy to do because I always knew how to explain why my mother deserved an award and why it was so important for her to receive an award. But this time is different. It's the first time that me and my brothers are actually being given an award for the campaign for justice for our mother. And it feels strange to talk about what this means to me, because we never really felt we had a choice. Fighting for justice for our mother was just something we had to do. It was a reflex. Really, the people who chose to join us in this campaign, to support us, they're the ones who faced the decision to choose to make sacrifices for us and what we're fighting for, or to choose to continue with their everyday lives. And so many people have chosen to support us. And it's really these people who've made this campaign possible. And they're the ones who've made sacrifices out of choice, unlike me and my brothers who made sacrifices because it was the only way we could live with ourselves. And so this award is so humbling because me and my brothers have always had this feeling for the past 3 years that whatever we do, it's just never enough. And so even if this feeling will never go away, at least this award is recognition that some people who matter think that we've made a difference. There's another reason that it's so humbling to receive this award. It's that it links my mother's case and the campaign for justice to some of the broader issues that Sergey Magnitsky was working on and that other recipients of this award were working on, which is the fight against kleptocracy, state capture, money laundering. This is the fight that my mother was engaged in, and her murder wasn't just a case of an attack against press freedom. It was really linked to all these broader issues, which are the defining battle of our generation. And so it's humbling that this has been recognized. Another reason it's so humbling for me and my brothers to receive this award is that it's an award for the campaign itself, given by someone who, from my perspective, has led one of the most persistent, courageous, and effective campaigns for justice, probably in the history of the world, or at least in my own generation. And so it's deeply moving that our own campaign for justice has been recognized by a campaign that we saw as a model for the work that we do.
As Andrew has said, this award is a real honor for us, but it also has particular significance. We were put in touch with Bill Browder early on in our campaign, just a few weeks after our mother was murdered, in fact. And Bill recognized what it was like to go up against a really corrupt state and to go up against its oligarchs at the same time. And it was Bill who said to us, do at least 3 things a day to annoy them. And so we did. Sometimes many more than 3 things a day. And sometimes we had to break ground. So we fought tooth and nail for Malta's first ever public inquiry. We fought for landmark constitutional rulings. And we fought for the collapse in the country's most corrupt government since independence. And it took us a lot to get here. So for 3 years, our lives have been completely suspended. So we've been around the world, from parliament to parliament, government ministries to ministries, conferences, courtrooms, seeing police officers and law enforcement bodies. And in each of those settings, we've found people who support us and continue to support us. And I'd like to thank all of those people who, over the past 3 years, didn't just stand beside us, but also fought alongside us. Our lawyers here in London and in Malta, the coalition of NGOs around the world, the individual politicians in Europe and elsewhere, and I think most significantly, civic society in Malta. So working together, we have started a process at last, and one that still hangs in the balance, of real change and real reform in Malta. So Matthew has always and remains at the heart of it. And he's now leading a foundation we set up in Malta in our mother's name, whose purpose isn't only to seek justice for her murder, but also for her work and to campaign for the Malta, an open and just one that she's always wanted, but never got to see. And in eldest brother fashion, it was Matthew who guided us from that period of intense darkness and into some of the light we can now at last see. And so he has the last word here.
For around 30 years, my mum worked as a journalist from when I was about 4 years old onwards. And during that entire time, she did her best to shield us from the abuse that she suffered, from the harassment that she endured, and often the violence too, physical violence. Upon her murder, my brothers and I suddenly had to move to the forefront. We could no longer live our lives as we imagined them, and we could no longer work in the background while my mother did the very public work of documenting corruption, wrongdoing, abuse, ethical failures in Malta. We not only had to take up the fight for justice for her murder, but also to make sure that her investigations were continued and that there was justice for her work too. This was an unbelievable responsibility. It still is one that we carry to this day. And we, my brothers and I, had been living, I guess, mostly normal lives before my mom was murdered. I was a programmer myself, working for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And I had to change completely, become a very public figure, start running the foundation that's named after my mom. It was a very, very sudden and difficult change, and of course a change into an environment that I and my brothers too were not used to being in. So to us, this prize is some confirmation that even though this is something that we're almost completely new to, we've been doing it well. And for us, that confirmation, that positive evaluation is really, really important. It's something that means a lot to us, that we've accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, and that what we've had to endure over the past couple of years has been worthwhile. Thank you.
Andrew, Matthew and Paul there, reminding us that for every name we know, in their case of course their mother Daphne, but also for every Maria Ressa, or indeed every Sergey Magnitsky, there is a whole host of people whose names we don't necessarily know, the wives, the husbands, the children, brothers, sisters, friends, colleagues, and to see those three sons taking up the mantle of their mother's work is, well, it's a thing of beauty, I think, and a tragedy, of course, that it is and remains so necessary. I think that observation holds true particularly for the next category and indeed the next winner, because the Outstanding Opposition Figure Award speaks to a story that continues to unfold and is of such immediacy that as we record these words, by the time you see them, it may well be that the situation has changed and has even perhaps worsened. To present the award for Outstanding Opposition Figure, Lord Chris Patten, a British politician, a Tory party grandee, who was, of course, the 28th and final governor of Hong Kong. He is now, and has been since 2003, the Chancellor of the University of Oxford, and his books include What Next? Surviving the 21st Century and Not Quite the Diplomat, Home Truths about World Affairs. He retains, though, a deep interest in and a profound affection for Hong Kong, and obviously deep concern about the unfolding of events there. And it is to that legacy and that deep concern that Lord Patten will shortly turn. It is therefore my pleasure to introduce this year's presenter of the Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Opposition Figure, Chris Patten.
My name is Chris Patten. I was Governor of Hong Kong, the last British Governor of Hong Kong before 1997. I was a European Commissioner for External Affairs, and I'm now the Chancellor of Oxford University. And I just want to say that it's a great honour, a great privilege to have the opportunity of making the award under these prizes for the outstanding opposition figure to Nathan Law. Nathan Law has been a really brave, courageous, determined, dedicated fighter for democracy and human rights and the rule of law in Hong Kong, where those things are being eviscerated, trashed by the Chinese Communist Party. Nathan was a student leader. He pressed very hard for democracy and for the rule of law and human rights for everyone in Hong Kong. He became the youngest legislator in the Legislative Council, which has just been castrated by the Chinese Communist Party. And throughout, he spoke up bravely for things which so many of us take for granted, the freedoms which make our lives special and which made Hong Kong special, a Hong Kong Chinese city, which has been made so successful because of a combination of freedom of capital, freedom of speech, and the rule of law. And those things are, of course, being fatally undermined by Chinese communists. Nathan has stood up for those things. He's done so bravely, and I think he richly deserves this award. Nathan will be the first to say that there are others who've been brave as well, but I think he deserves particular mention while we recognize all the others who've also made such courageous efforts to fight for things which many of us take for granted.
Hello everyone, I'm Nathan from Hong Kong. I'm really honored to receive this award from the Magnitsky Awards Committee, and it's a great recognition for my activism and the struggle of Hong Kong people who are fighting for democracy and freedom for more than 3 decades. It's been a long journey to me, and in fact, I'm not in Hong Kong now. I'm in London in a life of exile. For me, it's a decision that I've never thought of, and it's a decision that completely changed my life. I grew up in an impoverished family. My father was a construction worker. My mother was a street cleaner. My childhood had been in struggle financially, and living under this condition, I had never thought that I would become a politician or activist for myself. All I thought was to give my family a better life, to find a good job, get a good payment, and then to get my parents, get my mother to live a comfortable life. So that was what I think. But eventually, I encountered a lot of things that completely changed my mind. I realized that there are lots of problems in Hong Kong society, and our political system is extremely corrupted. There are no electoral rights for Hong Kong people, and the head of our government is not elected by the people, but basically appointed by Beijing, who does not care about the interest of Hong Kong people, but serve the political leads of the authoritarian government. So I started to participate in student movement. In 2014, I became the student leader in the umbrella movement in 2014, and I was elected as the youngest member of parliament in Hong Kong at the age of 23 in 2016. But subsequently, I was unseated by the Beijing government because they just didn't like me in 2017, and that's how an authoritarian government tried to suppress the oppositional voice and to warn the people by setting an example that if you violate their political pressure, political willingness, you will suffer. And the same happened a couple of days ago when 4 legislators were also disqualified. So after that, I went in jail for my participation in the umbrella movement. After serving the jail sentence for a couple of months, I was released and I went to Yale for further studies, and I came back to Hong Kong to campaign again, try to run. But unfortunately, just a couple of months ago, on 1st of July this year, the Beijing government implemented the notorious national security law. Basically, they could cook up cases saying that you are violating national security, national interest in the name of everything. Basically, it's a speech crime that they could prosecute any political activist that they want. And the sweeping power of that really threatens everyone. And a lot of people, they dare not to speak the things that they had been speaking anymore, because once you are supporting like sanctionings on officials or corrupt officials, or combating the Chinese authoritarian expansion, you are seen as breaching the national security law, and you will be locked in jail for years. So by the time I decided to flee, because I think it's very important for us to have an international figure that are recognized by the world to be able to speak freely on behalf of Hong Kong people and for their demands. So I left Hong Kong and landed in London and continue my international advocacy work since then. I think a lot of you may have a bit of knowledge about Hong Kong's protests. The most visible ones were definitely the ones happened last year, when there had been sea of people on the streets or flying petrol bombs in the battlefields in the city center, and a lot of the other scenes reminding people the struggle of Hong Kong. And I think it's crucial because these struggles are not only for Hong Kong people, but the people around the world. We are at the forefront of authoritarian and the conflict of authoritarian regimes and freedom fighters. And it's very important for us to preserve the freedom in Hong Kong, and also fighting for democracy, for the cause, and preserving the democratic values. Otherwise, the legitimacy of democracy will be endangered, will be diminished, and eventually the notion of authoritarianism will concur if we give up the struggle of Hong Kong that easily. So I've been doing a lot of international advocacy work, urging the world to be tougher to authoritarian regimes like the Russian government and the Chinese government, and to safeguard our shared values with concrete measures. Otherwise, it would be too late if we just let these authoritarian regimes do whatever they want. And it's very difficult for us to convince our people that democracy is what we treasure, and it's the things that we should be eternally vigilant about its erosion. So I think these are what means so much for me and for the people of Hong Kong. And I hope that I could work with you guys in the future in order to preserve our values, to state that democracy and freedom are the things that we treasure and we fight for. Thank you.
Thank you to Nathan Law, and I'm sure Nathan won't mind me telling you that that was in many ways the hardest award to give tonight, because so many people involved in the resistant movement in Hong Kong have a claim, if you like, upon the honour. But Nathan, by dint of being in London, was somebody who felt able to accept it. Many of his colleagues back in Hong Kong, who may also have been worthy recipients of this award, were frankly too frightened to have their name publicly associated with both the cause and the award, which I think brings into almost perfect perspective, albeit a heartbreaking perspective, the next award, which is for the outstanding Russian opposition activist. It is the only posthumous award of the evening, but once again, it is the only posthumous award of the evening because other people who were felt to be worthy recipients of Magnitsky Awards tonight still feel too frightened to receive any such public honour on behalf of family members who were no longer with us by dint of having made that sacrifice. And I hope he won't mind me saying this, but the presenter of the next award is somebody I always think of when we are discussing Sergey Magnitsky, discussing Boris Nemtsov, but discussing people who aren't able to join us because of the actions of the people whose power they threaten. Vladimir Karamosa is the chair of the Boris Nemtsov Foundation for Freedom and a democracy activist. But the reason I portrayed him in the way that I just did is that twice in recent years, in 2015 and in 2017, Vladimir has been poisoned with an unknown substance and on both occasions left in a coma. These obvious attempts upon his life are widely viewed as having been politically motivated, and you will not need me to remind you of the precedents which add weight to that view that these attempts upon his own life were indeed politically motivated. He works now as a contributing writer at the Washington Post and hosts a weekly show on Echo of Moscow Radio. Previously, Vladimir has worked for the BBC, RTVI and other media outlets. He remains one of the prime movers in international efforts to commemorate Boris Nemtsov, including with street designations now in Washington, D.C. and in Vilnius. A vice president of the Free Russia Foundation and a senior fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. He is in many ways the embodiment of not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk, and so a very, very fitting final presenter of this year's Magnitsky Awards. And so, to present the 2020 award for Outstanding Russian Opposition Activist, Vladimir Karamosa.
It is a sad tradition of the Magnitsky Awards that so many of them are posthumous, as testimony to the high price of courage and determination. This is again the case in 2020. Sergey Magnitsky was an unlikely human rights activist. Once a successful businessman and philanthropist with 2 university degrees, he could have done many things. But he could not stand idle in the face of injustice. "I can't tolerate when people are being beaten," he once said in an interview recalling his first arrest. That was in 2009, when he tried to shield an elderly woman who was brutally detained by police at an opposition rally in Moscow. In all, Sergey Magnitsky spent 6 years in prisons and penal colonies. During brief periods of freedom, he was a regular participant in opposition demonstrations. In 2012, he was pardoned by then-President Dmitry Medvedev after personal intervention from Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, another posthumous recipient of this award. Even while incarcerated, Magnitsky stood up for the rights of his fellow prisoners and of all political prisoners in Russia. he refused to accept lawlessness. For this, in March of 2016, in penal colony number 4 in Arkhangelsk region, he was beaten by prison guards until they broke his spine. Makhnatkin was released, but released to die, just as another prominent political prisoner, Vasily Alexanyan, had been before him. In this sense, the Russian authorities have learned the lesson of Sergey Magnitsky. Sergey Makhnatkin is survived by his wife, Anna Krechitova, who is accepting this award on his behalf. It is with sadness, but also with admiration and respect, that I present the posthumous Magnitsky Award for Outstanding Russian Opposition Activist for the late Sergey Yevgenyevich Makhnatkin.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to have such an opportunity to accept this award. It's a very big honor for me. Journalism meant a lot in Sergey Evgenyevich Makhnatkin's life. It's not exaggeration to say that he gave his life to it. Indeed, on the 31st of December 2013, at the Triumphal Square, he was detained while performing his professional duties as a journalist for the newspaper for human rights. Sergey Makhnatkin's journalist activity began in his youth. In 1971, he published an article in the newspaper Komsomolets Udmurtia about such a well-known phenomenon as a communist subordinate. In it, he said that young people should learn, get knowledge, instead of working for free on subordinates. This note couldn't not be forgiven him. It seemed to many that Sergey Makhnatkin won at the most sacred thing, the Soviet system itself. So, from his youth, he turned out to be a fighter against the regime. Sergey was not a Protestant by nature. He was a very kind and gentle person at heart. Outwardly, yes, he often seemed stern, but he was actually a very kind man. He didn't want to conflict with anyone. On the contrary, he always tried to be positive. But life has made him a die-hard man, uncompromising fighter. He was literally maimed, tramped on as a person, destroyed physically. He was almost imprisoned for life. Meanwhile, Sergey Makhnatkin's place was at the university. He should have to teach at a high school. According to his family upbringing and level of culture, he was a thinking, intelligent and subtle person. He taught for 2 years, but the path to science was closed to him. In those years it was very simple, and he wasn't the only one who was blocked from learning. Sergey's father, a war veteran, was the director of the Ijevsk Music High School from 1954. Evgeny Makhnatkin organized the first jazz orchestra in Udmurtia. But in the early 1970s, he was removed from office, and of course not by accident. This was a definite pattern. The regime was changing, and the Khrushchev era was coming to an end. Bridging stagnation. Life itself pushed Sergey to the path of protest. He started small, as is often the case, by fighting injustice where he worked. Then, inevitably, he had to come to generalizations. Putin's regime left him no hope of any improvement in the state of affairs in the country. On the contrary, he had to experience its cruel essence. Sergey Magnitsky, Anna Politkovskaya, Irina Slavina. The list is growing. And here in it, my husband, Sergey Makhnatkin. Today, I'm standing at Nemtsov Bridge. Sometimes I come here as a volunteer. Boris Nemtsov is another major and significant person in the protest and another tragic victim of the regime. The clock on the Spasskaya Tower stops sometimes. This is no accident. We have fallen out of time. We don't think about the past and we don't seem to want to see the future. But the time will come for truth and freedom. And then I believe that the guilty person will be named. I will continue my husband's work. And I'm a journalist too. I will do my best to be worthy of his memory. Thank you very much for recognizing the contribution of Sergey Makhnatkin to the progress and development of free journalism. The Sergey Magnitsky Prize is very significant for Russian society. It reminds us of the tragic fate of bold and uncompromising journalism in modern Russia.
And all that remains for me to do now is to thank you for your time and attention this evening, to invite you to join me in hoping that next year we'll be able to do this in more traditional circumstances, in a hall thronged with friends, colleagues, fighters, activists and advocates for precisely the values that Sergey Magnitsky's life and, of course, death commemorates. Before that, though, I will invite back to the podium the man whose tireless efforts make this evening and the continuing work of the Magnitsky Human Rights Awards and broader movement possible. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Browder.
Thank you very much for staying with us and honoring these wonderful and amazing people tonight. The awards committee, Magnitsky Awards Committee, considered many, many people, and there were so many worthy recipients for this prize. It was really almost an impossible choice to decide who should be honored. We're living in a world right now where, with COVID, everybody has taken their eyes off of abuses around the world, and as a result, dictators are running rampant, doing terrible things. And unfortunately, I think we're going to be having even greater selections of people for next year. And the only thing we have that we can fight with is information to highlight these cases, highlight the abuses, highlight the countries that are doing it, and consequences. Magnitsky Acts all over the world imposed on people who do these things. And so I hope you will join me in next year's Magnitsky Awards, and I hope you will join us and support us in our fight to get all civilized countries to pass Magnitsky Acts, and for those countries to impose them, the dictators and the kleptocrats who are dishing out the violence, the torture, the murder, the genocide. Thank you very much.